friends, welcome to my kitchen. Get out your stock pots because today we're going to be cooking one of the best homemade meals ever, chicken noodle soup. We're going to start off by making the chicken broth for the soup, and of course you need some chicken to make the broth. And I really like using chicken drumsticks because it gives it a really nice concentrated flavor. The meat is nice and juicy, so I really like using these. And I will often buy chicken drumsticks in bulk and divide them up into small sections and putting them in my freezer, and that way I have it ready to go anytime I want to make any kind of chicken soup. And then I'll just use it frozen. Also, anytime I'm taking apart a whole chicken, then I'll save the chicken wing tips, the backbone, and anything like that. I'll save it, put it in a bag and in my freezer, and then next time I'm making broth, I'll add that in along with the chicken drumsticks or any other parts of the chicken that you want to use. This week I was making something with chicken breast. So I took the chicken breast off the bone. I used that to make chicken cutlets. I saved the chicken bones, put them in my freezer, and I'm going to add them into the broth as I'm cooking it right now. Get out your stock pot and add in all of your ingredients, the chicken, and then I'm also using a large handful of garlic and an onion. And I add the onion with the peel because the peel gives it a beautiful yellow color, which I love. So I'm just cutting it in half, and I did wash the garlic and the onions before I do that. I also really like adding dry bay leaves, some peppercorns, and then I'm gonna add some salt and water. You'll also want to use good tasting filtered water. If you don't like the way your tap water tastes, it's not gonna improve by cooking it, so definitely use filtered water. Turn it on high heat, cover it up so it comes to a boil faster, and once it comes to a boil, reduce the heat to a low simmer. Cooking broth at a low simmer is the best way to go. You're gonna get the best flavor, it's gonna be really concentrated, really delicious, and the broth is gonna be nice and clear. If you cook it at a rolling boil, a lot of times the broth is gonna be cloudy, and a lot of it is going to evaporate much more quickly than if you cook it at a simmer. So an hour and a half on the stovetop, and if you want to cook it in the Instant Pot, I do have a recipe on my website, so you can use that one, and that is much faster. While the chicken broth is cooking, I'm gonna prep the rest of these ingredients, so by the time it's cooked, everything else is ready to go. So I have some onions. I usually use one large one, but since these are so small, I'm gonna use two. Then I have some more garlic cloves, some celery and carrots, and those are the aromatic vegetables that are gonna give lots of flavor to the chicken soup. And then I also have some potatoes. I absolutely love potatoes in soup. For the noodles, today I'm gonna use angel hair pasta that I'm gonna break up into small pieces, but you can use any kind of pasta shape that you like. I really like using orzo or ditalini, corkscrews or spirals, little shells. There's so many different ones that you can use. And of course, you can also use egg noodles, so any of those are great options. Of course, I'm gonna season everything with salt and pepper, and then at the very end, I'm gonna add lots of fresh herbs. I absolutely love dill, green onions, and parsley for chicken soup. Without those fresh herbs, I think the chicken soup just doesn't taste right. I peeled and washed all of my vegetables. I'm gonna take off the outer skin of the onions. And what I like to do is I like to add them in right to the broth as it's cooking, because this way we're utilizing the most of our vegetables, and it's gonna give more flavor, more of that yellow color that I like from the onions. I also like to cut off the ends of the celery and add that to the broth as well. And I washed all of these, like I said. So into the broth it goes. broth is boiling, so I'm going to reduce the heat to a simmer. I also like to use a slotted spoon to skim off some of the foam and get rid of it. And I do this a few times. So I'll come back here, skim off some of the foam, let it cook some more. But then we're also going to strain the broth later after it's all done cooking, so you don't have to worry about this too much. When the broth is almost done cooking, I just moved it over to the back of the stove and I took out this other pot that I'm going to use to cook the chicken soup, and I'm melting some butter in there. You can also use some oil if you would prefer, and then add all of your vegetables except the potatoes, so the carrots, the celery, and the onions. And I have my garlic peeled. I'm just going to add it in. Season it all with salt and pepper. And let it cook until it gets nice and tender. The chicken broth is cooked, and I like straining it through a fine mesh sieve lined with a cheesecloth, or you can use a paper towel as well. It's gonna make it extra clear, and that's how I like it. And I'm also going to set aside the chicken that I'm going to use later to add to the soup. When it's cool enough to handle, I'm going to take it off the bone and save the meat and add it in at the very end. Wow, it's so concentrated and absolutely beautifully golden. Look at that. When you have a really great tasting broth, it really brings the soup up to a whole nother dimension. If you've never made your own broth from scratch, I highly recommend that you give it a try. It's so good and really simple to make too. Even the smell of homemade chicken broth is so comforting already. The vegetables are soft, so I'm gonna pour in the broth and then add the potatoes and get them cooking. While I'm waiting for the potatoes to cook through, I took the meat off the bone and I broke the pasta into smaller pieces, and I also chopped up all the fresh herbs. I'm gonna add in the pasta, cook it for a few more minutes until it gets soft too, and then I'm gonna add in the chicken and the fresh herbs at the very end. Whenever you add pasta to soup, make sure to undercook it slightly, because even after you turn off the heat, it's still gonna continue cooking in that hot broth. It's gonna absorb more of that broth. So if you cook it until it's done, it's actually gonna be overcooked and mushy. For this soup and any soup, adjust the ingredients and the amount of liquid that you add so that you get the consistency that you want. If you like it on the thinner side, add more broth, add a little bit more water. And if you like it nice and thick and chunky, then add more of the potatoes and pasta or whatever other ingredients you're using. Everything about chicken noodle soup is therapeutic. The process of making it and then getting to enjoy this delicious homemade soup, warm and soothing. This soup is so rich in flavor and absolutely delicious. And as you can see, it's not that hard to make it from scratch, and it makes all the difference in the world, especially that incredible broth. I think that chicken noodle soup is one of the best treats for your family and even for your guests. Serve this with a loaf of warm bread, either make it yourself or just pick it up at the bakery and put it in the oven for a couple of minutes. And it doesn't get better than this. Head on over to Olga's Flavor Factory to get the recipe, and I would love to hear what you think when you give it a try and make it for your own family. Another thing to keep in mind about pasta and soup is that it is gonna get even softer. It's gonna absorb more of that broth. So if you're gonna make a big batch and reheat it, don't bring it to a rolling boil when you reheat it so it just warms up, because your pasta is gonna continue cooking and gonna get even more overcooked. Another option is to cook the pasta on the side and then just add it to your soup when you're eating it. That way it's not going to be absorbing all of that broth and you can keep it the texture that you like.